Hey, I'm Jan. I'm a data scientist in the Maker Risk core unit, and I'm going to be presenting the topic of monitoring and mitigation of financial risk. The first part, basically the first half of the talk, will be focused on the why, and basically contextualizing economic risk and why it matters. And the second half is going to be more focused on the processes, the tooling, and certain decisions that we basically took in the past, and just explain our practices. So to begin with, basically DAO governance in general, and especially like in DeFi space, there's this challenge of both collective action, of bringing people together, and also and aligning them around certain common goals, and also optimizing for multiple system goals, right? So these goals can be, let's say, at a high level described as decentralization, growth, revenue, and robustness. And obviously, decentralization is a core value in the ecosystem. And let's say growth and revenue are relatively simple to measure, but then we have robustness, which can be defined as the capacity of the system to go through with normal operations during the times of crisis. And that's something that our team is basically focusing on, and on the economic part of that, because there's other sources of risk that is out of the scope of our research. And the thing is that we are optimizing for these goals at the same time, simultaneously, and there's this trade-off space. And there's also necessary tension between all these goals, and we're always trying to somehow manage that. And here on the right, we basically have this visualized in a way that we have certain system goals, and then we're trying to optimize this space. And Maker is also specific because it has a very large governance surface, so that means there's a lot of knobs to turn, like the things that are not being automated. Other protocols took a different path with minimal governance surface, but Maker took a different route. So to extend it further, as I said, robustness is very difficult to measure. It's mostly hidden. It has to do mostly with both monitoring and mitigating it. And especially because we don't know the probability of certain events, and also what kind of economic impact that could have on the systems. So our focus is on basically answering the what if questions and move from the knowable unknown. So this means we know certain things that we don't know, and then we try to estimate these through different quantitative models most often. And then we moved into the known unknowns area. And if you compare this to the Web2 and TradFi slash CeFi space, it's obvious that those systems are much more opaque, whereas, let's say, with Maker, it's very clear that and transparent on-chain that the system is over-collateralized, and the risk factors are much more well-known when it comes to economic risk. And then we basically move to the second half, which is basically our work. And we're basically using a data product, a dashboard, where we have a lot of this kind of monitoring in place, and we have a continuous process where we're monitoring different changes in the system, and then we try to surface different insights that are then translated to on-chain decisions. And that basically is a collection of tools, processes, and also basically certain actionable items that are, again, translated on-chain. And that means most often proposing certain risk parameters, either that has to do with auction parameters, when it comes to PSM parameters, just different modules at MakerDAO, basically different smart contracts interacting with each other. And yeah, that's our main tool, and our goal is to basically optimize for the robustness in the ecosystem and to provide insight into that. And here we basically have how that would look like. We have, let's say, this is a portfolio level metric for capital at risk, which is similar to value at risk. It's just a different methodology, and then also debt at risk. And I'm going to go deeper into this now. So first, we have capital at risk, and capital at risk can basically be defined as a portfolio level risk measure for potential losses given certain market shocks, and it has to do with the exposure collateralized by volatile assets. And what we're interested in is to move from detection, so that means from the monitoring, to root cause analysis, basically answering the question of why something changed, and all the way to the point where we translate it to an on-chain decision. And one recent example was with Mana A risk premium increase, because we were monitoring the capital at risk metric for Mana A, and we saw a very rapid increase, and then we basically dove deeper into why that was, and we noticed that the liquidity decreased a lot. And that's why we surfaced that, and that was translated to an on-chain decision to basically increase the risk premium and also to decrease the debt ceiling. Then another, let's say, useful insight is depth at risk, and that's looking at the current state of the portfolio. Again, exposure collateralized by volatile crypto assets, and we're looking at a certain price drop, what amount of debt is liquidatable. That means that it would not necessarily be liquidated, but it's liquidatable. And this is basically if the vault owners don't proactively protect their exposure. And then we also split it by vault protection score, which is basically a heuristic model that looks at both the current state and the historical behavior of vaults and how well they protected themselves in the past. And that's when we can basically have a better measure of, okay, like how risky is the current exposure. And the more, let's say, high risk, which is the red one here, the more percentage-wise the high risk is, and the higher the depth is, then the more risky the current exposure is. Then, extended from that, we have vaults at risk, which is a simulation basically looking at if we have a certain price drop of the collaterals, which vaults could be liquidated, right? And that's basically split again per vault protection score, and we have which vaults, and then we can also look at the historical patterns, let's say also the protection score, and then we have also other metadata about these vaults. Like for example, we can see that here the second vault is in the protection score, we can see that it's protected by DeFi saver. So that also contributes to the positive assessment of the risk score of the vault less likely to be liquidated. And then we have, just for example, a comparison between current OSM price and the simulated OSM price, and just other interesting things. And we can also go to the owner address, and we can just like dive deep into analyzing this kind of dynamics. Then we have the auction parameters, which is another example, and this is more focusing on the collateral auction parameters. And we have basically two simulations. The first one is the auction throughput simulation, and we're looking at how long, basically the auction duration, the question of auction duration and the slippage, if basically like incurring per specific collateral type, and also basically the current state of the vault, basically the usage statistics. That means how much exposure there is, how much liquidity is, all those basically data, and that's basically the current snapshot of the system given the current risk parameters and how the liquidations would look like, how basically the auction design would go through. And also we have the percentage of ILG DAI that gets liquidated, and that's like the more it is, of course, the more slippage is incurred. The next one is basically the second simulation, which is the auction kick simulation. And in this one, we're looking at historical worst price drops. And what we do is that we basically change the risk parameters if we had different risk parameters at that point in time, and how the system would basically respond to that. So we have these price shocks, these major price shocks, and then again we are interested in auction duration and the slippage. And we basically create a parameter sweep over the risk parameters. And the idea is that we are looking at the tail risk of the distribution. As we can see here, we have on the left we basically have how was the price pattern, what was the price pattern on a specific market shock day. And then we have on the right we have the tail end of the distribution. We're using the CDF, let's say, to look at the 95th percentile. And then we look, what are some of kind of patterns that we can deduce from that. And here, even if we don't know much about Maker's auction design, we can see, let's say, if we increase both parameters, which here are basically, let's say, both buff and basically the other one, then we can basically see that if we increase both, the duration increases, right? So that's kind of like some intuitive insight that we can derive from that. But there's much more to that, and through this we can actively monitor the systems, and also we can basically surface and then provide on-chain decisions. Then another core part of our work is also monitoring other protocols across the ecosystem. And one such example where this is very clear is a relatively, let's say, recent integration with the direct deposit DAI module, the D3M. And through that, Maker can basically supply DAI directly into Aave and basically get basically from the DAI market its supply rate. So through that, Maker became directly exposed to Aave's economic risk. So that means that we need to monitor their governance decisions and be very aware of potential consequences for that. So because of that, we basically need to monitor its exposure and also basically create some kind of simulation models to better understand, okay, like if we make these basically parameter decisions, how will that translate to the supply DAI, and also basically the borrow rate that we basically bring the borrow rate to, and then also the analyzed income, right? Because then we have this trade-off again between risk and return. We have the return, which is the supply rate times the supplied DAI, and on the other hand, we have of course the risk, because we basically are exposed through the DAI to Aave's governance surface, which basically means also that this presents the challenge of potential bank runs, right? The next thing is that because of D3M, we needed to start building our own data infrastructure and just better understand the mechanics of Aave. And through that, we also eventually got funding from the Aave Grants DAO to build Aave Analytic Dashboard. And we were basically, so we had the tooling, we had the processes, and this ended up ultimately to our proposal to the Aave forum for the fork risk mitigation plan, which was also supported basically by the Aave community and translated to an on-chain decision. And more specifically, it was about temporarily freezing the ETH borrow. Yeah. And finally, we also have the system goal research. And here, it has to do with, again, the trade-off space that I mentioned, the 4 goals. And then we have different deep dives into different aspects of the system. For example, one very interesting question is when we're setting the stability rates, we need to the stability fees. We need to either explicitly or implicitly, we basically assuming certain elasticity of the borrowers. And for this reason, it matters a lot that we understand this better. So we have certain hypotheses. Let's say borrowers are either elastic or inelastic to, I don't know, like, changing the stability fee from 1% to 2%. But that's just a hypothesis, right? So we can basically dive deep into empirical data and validate that. So we want to move from research questions to basically better informed parameter decisions, right? We basically sometimes don't propose the parameter decisions directly, but basically we also just poll the opinion basically of the community, and then we can present certain trade-offs, and through that we can basically make decisions on the DAO level. One example is the impact analysis, and this is like a deep dive into a specific decision that was made by the DAO governance. And it was lowering the staked B stability fee to 0. And then the question was, let's say, because there was a large exposure at staked ETH A, and we were interested in, okay, like how much of that exposure migrated to staked ETH B, which can basically cause cannibalization, right? Income cannibalization. So that's one. So that's the negative effect, right? Because you basically have certain exposure, and you could basically charge 1.5% or something for that, or charge 0. And then again, we have this trade-off between growth and revenue, right? Like because we decrease this, we basically came to the point that we increase the DAI supply, but on the other hand, we basically are not charging anything for that, so we don't have as much revenue, right? So that's again this kind of trade-offs, and the amount of migrations, let's say from staked ETH A to staked ETH B, gives us some kind of idea of how elastic the borrowers actually are. And then we also have other topics. For example, the Vault user research, the survival analysis. We're looking at just basically bringing into different dimensions the Vault users, and just better understanding how they're retained over time. And for example, one of the key insights was that the larger the vaults, like let's say the institutional vaults, stay longer with Maker, and also other things. For example, let's say that if the liquidation ratio, I'd say the more risk tolerant vault users, let's say with ETH, those ones are more likely to churn earlier than the other ones that are more risk averse, right? Then we also have, let's say, again, the intra-protocol exposure migration. That's basically just looking at a general level and how different vault owners basically move their depth across the protocol. And then we're also researching more and more into inter-protocol migration, which means that looking at either different chains, different protocols, just like how does exposure move based on different rates. And another one is just liquidation protection analysis, which is, again, the idea is that we get a better understanding of vault behavior, how that translates ultimately to impact on the system goals, and then that can inform decisions for on-chain decisions. Yeah. So if somebody is interested in checking out the website, that's basically the QR code. And yeah, to finalize, I basically presented the processes, the tooling, and certain on-chain decisions that were made by the Maker Risk team. And the idea here is that we want to, let's say, move beyond the tribalism and the zero-sum gains, and just like contribute to an overall more robust ecosystem, and yeah, to encourage further DeFi adoption. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. We can take just a couple of questions before we move into the next session, which will be the last one before lunch. Yes.
Thank you. It was very interesting. And can you just go back to the slide on the collateral factors? I just want to make sure I get this right. So, oh yeah, no, the one. So basically, I think at some point you were saying that in order to fine-tune collateral factors, you would change it a little bit and replay the history of transactions with the specific collateral factor in order to see what would have happened. Am I getting this correctly, or is it something different?
I mean, we don't really change the collateral factor.
No, I mean virtually, like in a simulation environment. So can you show the slide with like a grid of green and red? This one, yeah. I think. Yeah, can you just maybe re-explain a little bit?
Yeah, so here we basically have, so these are the auction parameters. This is not collateral factors.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that's one. So basically we have two key auction parameters. Let's say one is like buff, like for example for how much above the for the auction price curve, right? So we have two different parameters, and then we see how that's impacted, right? We could also look at other, like whatever other decisions that can be made, right? But here we are just interested in the auction parameters, and for example, the collateral factors are outside of the scope of auction parameters, right? We're also looking at one of our analysis was also like, I didn't present it here, but we were also looking at, okay, if we increase or decrease the liquidation ratio, how would that impact basically the stability fees, or the risk premiums, right?
Okay. And a second question that I have is, you were mentioning trade-offs between growth and revenues and everything. So is this something that is handled by the risk team? Or like, how do you collaborate with other teams that are more in charge of growth or finance or whatever?
Yes, so this basically has to do with, yeah, here, right? So we have the trade-offs based on necessary tension, right? The thing is that the point here is that all this, it's a trade-off, so it's like you cannot pursue, you pursue one at the expense of the other, right? So there is this necessary tension between different teams, right? Like, the growth team says something, let's say that we have also the strategic finance team, and we need this. We basically need this kind of, okay, like, but we also cannot expect that our goal is of robustness is the only thing that is optimized for, right? Because then we're leaving other important things on the table. right? So there's always this kind of conversation, discussion of okay, like of weighing the importance of different system goals, and then that informs the decisions, right, on the DAO level.
Okay, and on this specific collaboration, have you been like happy with the current collaboration? Like, do you think like the current models like to collaborate has been successful, or do you think it could be improved? Or
I think it has been successful for sure. Yeah, I mean there is tension like in every like
yeah,
the
sure,
thing is,
sure,
let's
sure.
say at Maker the thing is that everything is transparent, right? Everything is
Yeah.
is public, so it's like all this stuff that is happening anywhere else, this is just public, right? But like this is just like just another day in the office, right? For most organizations.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I was wondering about the D3M. Has there been any talk about like collaborating with Aave to like? I can imagine that you can raise the optimal utilization ratio of the DAI Aave pool if D3M is there. So, is there any talk with Aave about that, or because I think that's the cause of like the DAI spread between the borrow and supply rate?
Yeah, I actually don't know about this, so like I can basically connect to some from the analysts from our team. So I'm not really familiar with this part, yeah. But I can basically get back to you and answer this question.
I have time for maybe one more. If not, thank you very much. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you.